I can only thank you for your patience and your forbearance. We live in an electronic age, and welcome to my electronic nightmare. I've been working out of my home office, preparing for this evening, and had a complete and total system failure. So dub onto something that I've just discovered tonight called a flashcard. Rush down to the radio station and jam the flashcard into the computer at work and get everything to print. I apologize for holding you 10 minutes longer than we expected. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Other than my electronic nightmare, it is my honored privilege to welcome you all to the Mary Irwin Theater here at the Rotary Center for the Arts. We will celebrate tonight that historical art of the debate. Mind against mind, words against words, ultimate theater as individuals engage in intellectual combat. And so it is a pleasure to welcome to you to not the first, not the second, but the third annual Roger Watts Advocacy Debate. For those of you who are here tonight, I am compelled to take a very short detour, a divergence from tonight's program, with a couple of quick thoughts about a series of events that in the harshest of ways have reminded me how blessed I am that decisions made by a great-grandfather to bring his family to Canada from Norway to find a new life as a Canadian now finds me standing at this podium. And I am so utterly, completely blessed at that historical decision in my family. I don't know how you end up in this auditorium. I have no idea what the circumstances are for any of you to be here. But somewhere, somebody made a life-changing decision. Either you, yourself, or someone on your behalf. I'm even anxious talking about it. It's a very emotional thing that is happening in our world today. And the events this day in Brussels, in Belgium, the understanding is that there will be more of this. It will tear away at life in our cities. It is going to happen in cities and countries around the world. So I would ask each of us here tonight to keep some of that in mind as we approach tonight's debate, because I don't think in any way it will prejudice the debate, the quality of tonight's discussions, but as I reflect on the subject of tonight's challenge of the debate, the topic is, be it resolved that Canada has an obligation to take refugees. And so let us remember currently that Canada, as it often does, has lifted the bar. We have brought 25,000 Syrian and Iranian refugees to Canada over the last weeks. Thank you. Some of you may agree, and there may be some of you who disagree, but however we have done this, they have come here as your ancestors did and as your forebears did. They have come here to escape the kind of terror that is gripping Europe tonight. And I really do. I thank you for that applause, because I think it is a measure of this country, and it's a measure of the people in this room and right across the nation. So with that, here endeth the heavy. Time to give you a small snapshot of life. Life up there at UBCO. A university, UBCO, isn't old enough to have the giant mature trees that establish a university, the ivory covered walls, the hidden historical hideaways. Metaphorically, UBCO is an expectant, excited youngster, eager to discover the world, wondering what's around the corner, jazzed to find a world of mystery. And there are those intangibles, reputations of sports teams, years of victories, the faculties that are represented in some cases here tonight, that are reflective of where the university is located. The intellectual capacity of the professors who locate at that university, drawn by its academic prowess. And it is there that you will find the intellectual storehouse, the collective of brain, the garrulous gathering of intelligence that comes together as the debator and the debating team. And so we get ready to launch tonight's program. There is one important note. Shaw Cable are here. In a very big way, they have recognized the growth of the Roger Watts debates. They have brought not one, not two, not three, but 4 camera crews. Would you please make them welcome? Now, here's the deal. They are, as you would expect, going to be aiming the cameras at the stage to capture the debate, the work of the teams. But there is also a camera that's going to be focused on you. Because whether you've been to a debate before or not, it is not a place, space, and time to sit on your hands. If a debate member has scored a point that is significant, let them know. Applaud vigorously. And now, I would ask, would you please stand? Because as in one of debate's time-honored traditions, our judges, our teams, our prime minister, his government will be brought into the house to the skirl of the pipes and the beat of the drum. Would you make them welcome, please? Shall I take my seat? Ladies and gentlemen, we are here to honor one of life's best, Roger Watts. who for the better part of 25 years practiced law at Saloon Watts here in Kelowna, described as a larger-than-life character personality. And he spent most of 25 years matching wits, matching words, building cases, starting out with that phrase, that time-honored phrase, my learned opponent. Unfortunately, as often happens, life at its harshest steps in, and in 2011 on vacation, Roger Watts died of a pulmonary embolism. And that is how and why we find ourselves here tonight. Later this evening, somebody who knew him well, Queen's Counsel, now retired Wally Lightbody, will introduce you to Roger Watts. Wally knew him better than most, and later tonight we will honor the life that was. Most of you are here to be entertained by some of the best young minds from UBCO going head-to-head in tonight's debate. Be it resolved that Canada has an obligation to take refugees. As you enjoy the debate, the four individuals looking at this event with a different set of optics, listening with a different set of ears, are our judges. They will determine who scores that rapier-like point, which maybe not mortally wounding someone, positions the opponent for a swift and merciful end. They will judge the weight of this debate, and I'm honored to introduce them to you now. In the interest of time, would you please hold your applause till all have been introduced. Our head judge is Jane Cartwright, in 1982 called to the bar, practicing law at Pusher Mitchell. Her talents readily apparent, called to the bench in 1995, not only with a UBC law degree, also a degree in psychology from SFU. Practices devoted to family law, governor of the Law Foundation of BC. She hears criminal, family, and civil cases. Please welcome our head judge, Jane Cartwright. Don Lethwaite, a Valley boy, raised in Kelowna, Bachelor of Commerce, Bachelor of Law, called to the bar in '79. A year later, called to the Alberta bar. I have no idea where the wisdom in that decision was. He practiced for 7 years and then finally saw the error of his ways and returned to Kelowna. He's acted for the city of Kelowna in a number of cases, a former secretary of the Bar Association, and he is on the board of Community Futures, Don Lethwaite. Sharon Simpson, personally, I know her as a writer, historian, and for a couple of years as a superb broadcaster. With an affection of words, she's written about Kelowna's General Hospital, the packing industry, the lumber industry, but if you have not seen her definitive work, it is a phenomenal book, The Kelowna Story, an Okanagan History. Time as a city councilor with a unique perspective for the city we call home. Sharon holds a Bachelor of Arts and a social work degree from UBC, Sharon Simpson. Maxine DeHart. Max, thank you. She is an 11th hour, minute-by-minute replacement. Colin Bazarin, unexpectedly called away from the city. She is the 11th hour stand-in for Mayor Colin Bazarin. Who do you call? Max. And who doesn't know this whirling dervish? This dynamic duo who for successive years has personally driven one of the biggest social conscious efforts in the city, the United Way drive-through for breakfast at the Ramada Lodge, which is her other home. I think she sleeps in a sleeping bag behind her desk. Ladies and gentlemen, Jane Cartwright, Don Lethwaite, Sharon Simpson, Maxine DeHart, our judges, please make them welcome. I have one more person to introduce, and then I step out of the way. Whew, they say. Jamie Maw, on the other side of the stage, is the debate moderator. His task to control the questions asked, to ensure the debate remains focused, unbiased. It is his responsibility to ensure that each side gets equal time. Time to share viewpoints, time to rebut, time to refute the opposition, by definition. If he or she does not, well, then we might as well have a recorded voice to ask the questions and have a buzzer go off. He's a man of words for years with the Vancouver Magazine, writes passionately about food. He's been inducted into the BC Restaurant Hall of Fame, Probably the most famous piece of work that he's done, though, is the Stone Soup Chef. And no, it is not his latest release as a song. It is something he created for the Gospel Mission that for a number of years performed a wonderful work at the Gospel Mission. Please welcome your host and your moderator, Jamie Ma. Jamie, over to you.
Thank you very much, Phil. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for making me blush, Phil. For the past several months, we've been besieged by a very low level of debate just to the south of us. It's rattling our neighbors to the core of their democracy. Simply put, we believe here tonight that debate is not about who can yell the loudest. And because we do everything in the Okanagan Valley, including civilized and witty debate, so much better, tonight at the third annual Roger Watts debates, we propose the following resolution. Be it resolved that Canada has an obligation to take refugees. Across the center, in blue, you will see the protocols for tonight's debate. It's parliamentary style, with members of each team alternating with their opponents and allocated time limits, as you'll see on the right margin. The moderator, that would be me, may choose to intervene if I feel that a debater requires another minute to conclude a point, if the open debate requires more time for adequate rebuttal, or if any debater defies the standards of Parliament, either by unduly personalizing the debate, using unfortunate language, or being Trumponian in their vulgarity. As you can see, the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition will have 5 minutes to open and respond, then 8 minutes from the Deputy Prime Minister and Deputy Leader of the Opposition for their responses. We then enter the exciting, wide-open, rapid-fire round with no speaker to exceed 2 minutes, followed by the Leader of the Opposition and the Prime Minister in their closing statements, and thence the judges' questions. The judges will then go off to sequester while we hear some exciting words about UBCO. 10 minutes later, they will come back with checks in hand, and the prize money is substantial, certainly relative to student income, $1,000 each. That's a lot of KFD. $1,000 each for the two winners, $500 each for the runners-up, and for the alternates who have to understudy and learn their stuff just as brilliantly as the actual debaters, we have some gift certificates for dinner at the West Coast Grill and Oyster Bar because they work just as hard. That's the protocol. We'll be watching it carefully. We have a lovely little tradition here. We welcome back this evening last year's winner, or one of them, Lawrence Watt from UBCO, who will be the official timekeeper this evening and assisting me down here. Without further ado, all set, Carl?
I am, as ever.
Dr. Carl Hodge, ladies and gentlemen, UBCO
This is my
PP&E.
speech. Make yourself comfortable. Seriously, I'm here to put tonight's debate somewhat in context. I think for most of us, really, the refugee crisis we're dealing with right now, indeed the world is dealing with it right now, first became actual or serious last September when the news broke of and the photographs broke of a young Syrian boy, Alan Kurdi, his lifeless body watching up on a Mediterranean shore. And it sort of became immediately a symbol of a much larger crisis. But that was in 2015. At that time, the Syrian civil war had been going on for at least 3 years as a civil war. And it was indeed only part of a larger upheaval currently convulsing northern Africa, the Middle East, and all the way into Central Asia. It was really the Syrian civil war, the Arab Spring, which started in Tunisia and in December 2010, turning into the Arab political winter. We've been dealing with the consequences ever since. But when I say we, I have to really differentiate because some of us have been dealing with it more urgently than others. Canada, as of last fall, pledged to take in 25,000 Syrian refugees. And to put that in context, the Federal Republic of Germany pledged to take in 800,000 and has so far absorbed in excess of 1 million. So putting this into context is really to say this. We've often wondered over the past 2 decades, really, whether we'd ever have a general Middle Eastern war, and if we did, when it would come. And I submit that we're in it now, and though it be a low-intensity war, it's a statistical fact that it is producing movements of people and refugees the biggest the world has seen since World War II. So in many ways, it has the human consequences and the unfolding human consequences of a world war, the largest movement of people seeking a refuge from their governments and from war and everything that goes with it since World War II. Canada's distant from the crisis, and that way is only indirectly impacted by it. But it's interesting that Alan Kurdi's party family was actually trying to get, in the short term, to Greece. But in the long term, they were trying to reach and make contact with relatives in Vancouver, BC. So that sort of brings the whole refugee crisis home. If I give you any more, I will prejudice the debate, I think, one way or the other. We are here tonight to talk about whether and if Canada has an obligation to take refugees and what that means. I want you to join me in inviting our debaters to step up to the podium now. 4 brave people up here to give you their best tonight, 4 brave, talented debaters at the same time. Could you please welcome them along with me?
Ladies and gentlemen, our Prime Minister this evening is Lena Gomez. Lena, thank you. Our Deputy Prime Minister for the 4 motion is Daniel Candy. And Daniel, I must personally apologize to you for misspelling your name in the program as Candle, but it's clear to me that when I was writing this, I was burning it at both ends. My apologies. The Leader of the Opposition is Kimberly Owar. Thank you, Kimberly. Good luck. And the Deputy Leader of the Opposition is Sarah Nunes. Welcome, Sarah. We're ready to go. The Prime Minister, Lena Gomez, will lead off with her 5-minute opening statement. Thank you, Lena. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We, the government, want to take the time to acknowledge that we are seated here tonight on the traditional territory land of the Okanagan people, who share this land, what we were once guests of. Tonight, we will be addressing Canada's obligation to take refugees. We define Canada as a nation of multicultural citizens and government officials. We define has an obligation as an act or a course of action that is legally and morally binding to Canada. We define to take refugees not as to give them blankets or to send over medication to refugee camps, but to bring them home with open arms so that they can have a home to be in. We define refugees, according to the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, as refugees are people who have been submitted to human rights abuses and who no longer can stay in their place of origin. Tonight, let's remember that all refugees have the right to protection wherever they are. My partner and I will be touching base on 3 main points. First, we'll touch base on our legal obligations. We have obligations with IRPA, which is the Immigration and Protection Refugee Act, and we also have an obligation to the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. Then we will talk about our moral obligations, which as Canadians we have following line with our origins and with the precedents we have set and what we have also failed to do. And lastly, We want to debunk some of those perceived myths within an economic state that comes in with our obligation to take in refugees. So first off, I'd like to talk to you guys about the obligation that we have to take on refugees. Passed in 2002, the Immigration and Refugee Act allowed Canada to take on refugees, which were perceived as in accordance to the United Nations Declaration Human Rights Act, but also under Section 91(1), a person that is in need of protection and whose removal of their country is due to danger or substantive grounds to exist, danger, or risk to their lives. The Supreme Court of Canada also confirmed that the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom guarantees asylum to those who seek it and also provides fundamental justice and aid. In Canadian immigration law, anyone who wishes to claim refugee status must come from a place of origin. They cannot make a stop along the way. With that, and with the turmoil that has been happening in the few years, and with the rise of refugees amongst our worlds, we notice that the Canadian government is now looking towards the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights definition of refugees, and is now accepting those refugees who are coming in from Greece, refugee camps, and Germany, and granting them asylum, although they have stepped into different lands. I will then talk about the moral obligations. Being discussed, we have to acknowledge that we are on traditional origins of the land we are currently living on. This is something our government is slowly trying to learn. The origins of the word Kanata, Canada, means settlement, village, a place where all are welcomed. We see the Aboriginal value of what Canada should be when Chief Makwinna of the Nakuta region states, "We have no such bank, but when we have plenty of money and blankets, we give them to our chief and their people, and we share with them our land, and by return them with interest." As we begin to understand what our ancestors of our nations understood previously, our moral obligation to share this land with those immigrants in need aid consolidates. What we know Canada now is largely due to the multiculturalism and the immigration created by our ancestors. Those around the world need our help. They're not only people, they're people of our people. We stand today with open arms to every population that has been wrongly attacked or persecuted, not only because it's our legal obligation, but because we have a moral obligation to treat this land like our ancestors did. Now I'd like to talk about and shed some light on the economic aspects and some misconceptions that we have as a world and globally towards accepting refugees. We are forced to face the facts that Canada has a growing retirement age and a less than optimal birth rate. From 2006 to 2011, we have seen an increase of 14%, over 5 million people. The Washington Post found that immigrants benefited the local population of 19 out of the 20 countries. The Huffington Post today posted that in Syria, and all the refugees that have been coming in, 1 out of 10 started a job and start a business. We can see this happening and succeeding throughout. As Prime Minister Joe Clark says, we have the capacity to do more, and I think we all recognize that we have the tradition of doing more. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Prime Minister. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition, Kimberly O'War, speaking against the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Honourable Judges, Government. The resolution before us today is be it resolved that Canada has an obligation to take in refugees. Now, the government has proposed several justifications as to why they believe that an obligation exists. Before we, the opposition, show these to be inaccurate and frankly false, we would first like to acknowledge and make clear that by disagreeing with the argument that an obligation exists, we are in no way advocating or even promoting for a ban of refugees. Canada is largely composed of immigrants and refugees, and to say otherwise would be completely inaccurate. We do, however, disagree that a legal or a moral obligation exists. And now to the reasons that government has presented. So the first point brought up was that we have a legal obligation due to the ERPA and the UN Declaration of Human Rights. The first point I'd like to bring up to counter that is if there is currently a legal obligation to intervene in the refugee crisis, does it not follow that there was also a legal obligation to intervene when the tensions were flaring up? And isn't the presence of a refugee crisis at the moment simply implying a failure in the past of Canada to intervene, and act on that legal obligation? And to continue on to that, Canada and the Canadian government has a primary obligation to the Canadian citizens. The UN Charter itself recognizes that, and recognizes that any edict placed by the UN Charter cannot contravene the domestic and national interests of the Canadian people or the country in which the UN is in treaty with. The second point that they brought up is that we have a moral obligation to take in refugees. Once again, we've acknowledged that there is a refugee crisis, but again, the presence of a refugee crisis denotes that we failed in the past. We failed in our legal obligation, and we also failed in our moral obligation to intervene before this blossomed, or should I say negatively spiraled, into a refugee crisis. And furthermore, the side government brought up the fact that because we have a history with the First Nations of them accepting refugees, we now have this moral obligation. Because the First Nations historically accepted immigrants, we now have an obligation to accept refugees. However, this creates some sort of a moral budget. So because we failed on one account, does it therefore mean that we can make up on a different account? Life simply doesn't work that way, and to imply that is a simplistic and honestly irresponsible argument. The last point I'd like to bring is what the government spoke about with regards to an economic benefit. The government tried to make the link between the refugees economically benefiting us, which no one disagrees with, and made this an obligation. However, isn't it somewhat self-interested to argue that because they benefit us, therefore they should come in? At least side opposition is able to say that Canadians voluntarily take in refugees, and we're not in the business of making a constant cost-benefit analysis as to whether or not it's justified to bring them in. In fact, consider the ramifications of this type of thinking. What do we do when it's no longer economically beneficial for us to have refugees here? I'll leave you with this question. And now I'd like to prep the ground for what my partner will be debating. Our three key points, the first of which being is that the current refugee program works. Canada has a traditional humanitarian reputation worldwide, and this is not because some government told us that we must open our hearts and our homes and our resources. This is because we do it voluntarily, out of the goodness of our hearts. People who are inspired, people who are capable choose to open their homes. In fact, in 2014 alone, 700 refugees were Syrian refugees were brought in by private sponsors. That's almost twice the number of Syrian refugees that were actually brought here over government assistance. Second of all, we have a 94% acceptance rate of Syrian refugees. Of the 277 applications, we accepted 261. Is the government truly trying to say that they can actually do better than that, considering the lag in their previous commitment to bring over 25,000 refugees? And second of all, the two last points that my partner will be elaborating on later, the first of those being the feasibility of such an open-ended commitment. And finally, the alternatives. We as the opposition do recognize that taking in refugees is a solution, but we do not think that it is the only solution. We believe we can do more. We can send aid, we can work with NATO, who we do have a legal obligation to, and support Turkey, who is a NATO member, on the front lines. And in fact, in conclusion, for the government to create an obligation is, quite frankly, a cheap publicity stunt by government to capitalize on a global tragedy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Honourable Leader of the Opposition. In response, the Deputy Prime Minister, Daniel Candy.
Thank you very much, my learned opposition, for bringing up a fairly interesting debate to my attention. I'd like to begin by addressing the points that you made. You state that that our obligation is based on our past failures. However, today we are not debating on whether or not Canada should have intervened in Syria before this crisis began. We are looking at the obligation that stands today, at this moment in time, the obligation that we have to take in these refugees. Whatever happened before that is not that we can discuss this on the sidelines, but it is not to be brought to this table. Leading on from that, you say that out of the kindness of our hearts, we take in refugees. I will touch on this towards the end of my debate, because I feel that I have fully understood that feeling, and it is not simply because of the kindness of our hearts, but it is because of the obligation to ourselves as Canadians that we take in these refugees. Leading on from that, you say that it is a cheap publicity stunt. However, it has not all been you have not heard the names of each and every one refugee that has come into Canada. However, they have come in. As the public, you have sponsored to take in refugees. UBCO recently passed a referendum to take in and sponsor refugees to come to our university. This was not simply a publicity stunt, but this was because we cared. Now, I'd like to go into my argument and look at the three main points that we will bring across to you: the economic obligation and practicality of taking in refugees, the legal obligations we have, and the moral obligations we have as Canadian citizens to take in these refugees. To begin with, as it stands today, the current time as we are debating it as it stands, Canada's economy is capable of taking in refugees, that refugees represent a symbiotic relationship with Canada in that they need safety and security that we have, and we need their expertise, we need their workforce, we need their assistance. We need them to enrich our economy, not simply the economy to do with money, but the economy of culture. As Canada is a vastly multicultural society, refugees come in and only enhance that. Let me bring your attention to New Brunswick. Earlier this year, the lobster plants had to throw away 1,360 kilograms of lobster simply because they could not find enough people to process these goods. Think of the economic loss that Canada felt. Now, that may be a small thing, but imagine that widespread. The economic losses Canada is feeling simply because we do not have enough labor to take care of these. However, refugees are willing to take on any jobs. Canadians may see this as above them because we have 64% of us have a university degree. 64% of us would not want to be processing lobster. However, refugees, some may not be having these university degrees. Some may take these jobs because that's what they need. Over 2,500 jobs are waiting to be filled in New Brunswick, which can easily be taken over by refugees. Moving on from this, between 1979 and 1978, Canada historically took on 60,000 refugees from the Vietnam War. Now, Dr. Morson Besa studied these refugees and found out that 10 years later, 86% of these were healthy and working and spoke English. He found out later that 1 in 5 was self-employed, and they were not a drain to the taxpayer in any sense at all. They were taxpayers. That refugees come in to enhance our economy because that's what they want to do. They feel a sense of responsibility, of loyalty to Canada because of the time we came in to help them at that point in time. And as it stands, we have this Canada has an obligation to maintain our economy. We have an obligation to take in these refugees and to bring them in because they are a key to our success as Canadians. And when they come and become Canadians, we are a key to their success as well. Now, moving on to the legal obligations. To say that Canada does not have an obligation to take in refugees would simply be to brush these legal obligations aside, would simply be to shrug them off your shoulder. We cannot do this. You could say that we will not take in refugees, but you cannot say at one point that we do not have an obligation to take them. Because we signed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which stated in Article 14, Paragraph 1, that everyone has a right to seek and enjoy other countries' asylum. That we signed the 1951 Refugee Convention, and which recommended that governments continue to receive refugees in their territory, and that they act in concert in a true spirit of international cooperation. Canada, being a world superpower, has the ability and has the legal responsibility to now take in these refugees. By signing these treaties, we have given our word, we have given our signature that we will take in these refugees, that we will help the international community with these international problems, that we will not stand on the sidelines, but that we will get involved in these things. We may not want to get involved in wars because we're a peaceful nation. However, should there be a war, we will get involved in trying to secure peace and trying to secure safety for those that we can provide safety for. Now, Canada, who do you say is Canada? I believe that Canadians ourselves, we make up Canada. That you are not Canadian simply because you were born here, but you are Canadian because you have taken up the values of what it means to be Canadian. You have taken up values of generosity, of kindness, You've taken up a multicultural society. As Justin Trudeau said, Canadians are open, accepting, and generous. Qualities that should therefore be accepted in our immigration policies. As our Prime Minister himself elucidated, as Canadians, we are morally bound by calling ourselves Canadian, by the values we hold ourselves to. They morally bind us to then take in, to reach out and offer that helping hand to whoever who may ask. Refugees are not people who are out to harm us. They're people who are out to ask for our assistance and our help in a time when their country is being prosecuted, when they do not feel safe in their own lands, when they come to us as a place of safe haven. And we are supposed to be there. We hold ourselves accountable to give them that assistance. That to say that we do not have an obligation there is against who we call ourselves to be. And to say that this is something new, it is not. It is not. In 1956, we took 37,000 Hungarians who escaped Soviet tyranny. In 1975 to 1980, as I mentioned before, 60,000 Vietnamese victims came to us, and we accepted them, the boat people. In 1999, Canada airlifted 5,000 Kosovars to safety in Canada. And on 27th February, we took in 25,000 Syrian refugees, and we shall take in more, because that is our obligation to our people. That is our obligation to our economy. That is our obligation to ourselves, that we cannot call ourselves Canadian and simply look at these people and brush them aside. We cannot call ourselves Canadian and simply stand in apathy as people are dying. We cannot call ourselves Canadian when people like Alan Kudder simply die on a beach far away from us, and we cannot call ourselves Canadian and let that happen and stand and do nothing. So I tell you today that we have an obligation to do it, and we must. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Prime Minister. Now, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, the Honourable Sarah Nunes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honourable Judges. Canada can take in refugees. Let's get that clear. Canada is taking in refugees. However, for government to come here tonight and say Canada is obliged to take in refugees is an insult. It disregards the fact that all Canadians have actually reached out on their own accord. And it's the government also jumping on this bandwagon saying, all right, now let's make it a policy, and this is how Canada is helping. Opposition disagrees with this approach entirely. I would like to begin by first addressing the few points government has brought forward in this entire debate. From there, I would like to move on to opposition's 3 points on why we stand here tonight to say that Canada is not obliged to take in refugees. Our first point is because it is a voluntary act, which my leader touched on before. Our second point is the infeasibility of this foreign policy government has brought forward here tonight. And the third point, our final point, alternatives, better ways of helping solve this problem. So the first point government has brought forward, legal obligation. Side opposition would like to ask government how far they actually read into the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. Because if you read beyond the first line, Section 3 states that this act is to be applied if it furthers the domestic and international interests of Canada. There is no legal obligation here. This act is setting the groundworks when Canada wishes to reach out and help. UN Charter, UN rights they cite. Opposition would like to add UN Convention relating to the status of refugees, which they left out. These two conventions explicitly state that these guidelines are to be done, these steps are to be followed, following the capacity of the nation, the willingness of the nation. Every single UN charter acknowledges a nation's sovereignty. There is no legal obligation here. Their second point, moral obligation. The way the Aboriginals who first had lived in Canada opened up their lands and gave it to us. We must follow their example. We are morally obliged to help. Opposition would like to ask, if government is so for this, how is government doing in respecting the rights of Aboriginals and minorities? When right here today, government failed to acknowledge that this is Seelick territory and just said Aboriginal. There is much that can be done here, and to link this together is irresponsible. Opposition believes the refugee crisis is the refugee crisis. Minorities and Canadian rights is minorities and Canadians' rights. The government can balance both, but let's not mix them up together here. The third point, economic benefit. The government says that Canada can benefit, therefore we are obliged. They cited Vietnam and how it works so well. Yes, opposition agrees with this fact. It is a fact. It did work well. But government did not mention the time lag this economic benefit took. It is the second generation of refugees, the refugees who choose to continue to live here, that provide the economic boom. It's not, and boom. It's not like that. There is a time lag which government did not take into account. Further, I believe they are confusing economic immigrants with refugees. Refugees, let's not forget, ladies and gentlemen, refugees leave because they are afraid. They are terrified, they are in danger. They are not leaving because they don't want to live there. It is home. It is still home. Government's solution, this paternalistic opinion of saying, we can bring them here, give them the menial jobs we don't have enough Canadians for, and they will love it. They want to go home. Their final point, Canada's reputation. Is Canada's reputation being told by the government what we are obliged to do? Or is Canada's reputation, opposition's first point, that voluntary act? Now that we've finished decimating government's points, allow me to move on to ours. The first point, which my leaders so eloquently touched on, the voluntary act. Ladies and gentlemen, Canadians, we're not known because we do what we're told. We're known because we do that extra thing and don't have to be told. All these private sponsors, who told them, oh, you have this extra income, you have that spare room, why not take a refugee family? No, this is not how it happens. This is never how it happens. We are well known as a humanitarian nation because we do it, because we want to. Refugees, when they come here because they know this Canadian family wants me. This Canadian family is willing to help me. Not this Canadian family is stuck with me because the government said they're obliged to, like Greece and Turkey. Our second point, the infeasibility of it all. We can look at this at several layers. First, population. How are we to help assimilate the refugees in or integrate them? Sweden always sets aside a certain percentage of their government budget to finance their integration policy. What is government going to do here when you have currently the refugees we would be bringing in would be Syrians, different culture, different way of life? How is government to address that? Right now, as my leader touched on, the method works because we have that personal touch. It is family with family. The attention is given, the guidance is provided. Second, the space. Where are we going to put them? Because opposition is against opening refugee camps here. Right now, we find the infrastructure. When we have it, we bring in the Syrian family. This is the best way to go, opposition says. And the policy government is putting forth here tonight is infeasible. Our final point, alternatives. Alternatives. Opposition does not agree with this short-sighted, hasty policy of governments, where suddenly they are aware of the problem and they pass this broad policy. Opposition says we want a permanent and effective solution. Since government is so caught up with obligation, let's give you two. Responsibility to protect, which Canada is committed to. Obligation to Turkey, who is a NATO member. If we are to help, let's send aid, human aid, financial aid, logistical aid. Canada has already committed to provide $653 million humanitarian aid to Syria. 2,333 million for development. Let's give more, opposition says. Therefore, Canada, the sweet land of maple syrup, we are not obliged, as government says. We do it because we choose to. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Nunes. We now come to the very exciting rapid fire round. I'm just going to establish one protocol to when you have maximum of 2 minutes within the 10-minute period. Please do not speak over each other aggressively. And I am going to lead with the Deputy Prime Minister. Please go ahead.
I'd like to ask the opposition here, as Canada still has growing economies, for example, the Okanagan Valley, and over 9 million square kilometers of land, are you simply saying we do not have enough space, and that it is unfeasible with all this capacity to take in refugees?
Has government forgotten that while Canada consists of a large landmass, not a lot of that is livable? We're talking about Syrian refugees, currently, today, let's bring it to today, Syrian refugees living from Syria, coming and possibly landing in Edmonton Airport on Christmas. Government has to take into account that while we do have the landmass, not all places are available. Also, for economic jobs, Canada currently has a 7.3 job unemployment rate. If we can't even give our own citizens jobs, how are we going to give these refugees jobs?
The floor is open. Dive in.
Do you want to ask something?
And to further on to that, the definition that the government itself gave us was that an obligation is an act or a course of action which a person is morally and legally bound to do so. Excuse me, but I fail to understand how an economic benefit creates a moral or legal obligation. If you're talking about economic benefits, that's a cost-benefit analysis. That's something that changes from day to day. An obligation is something that exists regardless of the context, regardless of the situation.
Thank you.
Prime Minister, do you have a response?
Thank you. One of the biggest things that we did want to differentiate, and I think we did make clear, was that we wanted to debunk myths of economic misconceptions that were around refugees, because we are aware that our neighbors to the south and maybe some Canadians have those. So we are arguing that we do have legal and moral obligation, and we wanted to provide an economic insight to support why we need to remind the community of those
There's
issues.
a difference between economic opportunity and obligation. To tie them both together is irresponsible.
It is not irresponsible if it is simply being used to support and substantiate an argument on a several multi-level basis.
And to just say that we are using them for the lower label jobs, that is not true. A lot of refugees do come in and pursue their masters in which they had. We have a lot of Syrian refugees that are coming in, and once they do, there are programs here in Kelowna that get the information about their education and see how universities, just like the ones we're attending, come out. Is it not true that every single person on this podium is either, or at least one of the four of us, is international? Every one of us has a second generation or either born across in a different land. And we've all come in to receive education and to further that.
Opposition is not disputing that. We agree that people do come here and reap benefits. However, to say once they reap these benefits, they're going to contribute it back to the Canadian economy. These refugees, again, as opposition said, want to go home.
Unfortunately, in our international stage, home sometimes is no longer there when they're ready to go. And as we saw today, the world does not continue as it was known in the past. Some of these refugees accept this to be home because for their children and to see the safety of sending them to schools without knowing that there's a bomb threat, they will take the cold because that is where they can see the happiness in their child and know that they will come back to them.
This refugee crisis is a result of the civil war in Syria, which is their home.
We are not only talking about Syria. This is every single refugee.
Canada, who is a superpower, as you said, if you want to talk obligation and you want to really have this welfare of these refugees in mind, would you not send aid, do whatever it is possible to make their home a peaceful nation so that they can choose
You simply
to
say
return
do
if
whatever
they
it is
want to?
possible. Isn't that not the same thing as taking in refugees?
To further on to my member's point here, the government is trying to put a blanket statement in saying that we should take in refugees. The opposition does not deny this. We do think that we should take in refugees, but contrary to the government, we think that we can do more than that. We think that we can send aid. We think that we can create a permanent and effective solution to the issue on the ground. Instead of trying to bring the problem overseas, trying to transplant these people who've already been traumatized, moving from everything they hold dear, everything they hold familiar, we're trying to do more than just that, and we're trying to help them. We're trying to create a permanent international relationship.
If the government wants to talk obligation, should we not be obliged to send the help to them instead of make them come here to receive the help?
The government does not feel we're obliged to send troops to go and die in wars far overseas. But we feel obliged to bring in people to where safety is.
No one has said that we want.
You simply, didn't you not just elucidate that we send aid in terms of military enforcement?
No, we never said that.
No one said the word military. What we're doing is saying that we have an obligation to Turkey, a NATO member, who's currently dealing with the front lines of the refugee crisis. We can send aid. As my member said here, we can send logistical aid, we can send humanitarian aid. We can do more than just taking in refugees. We can look for a permanent solution that doesn't just put a Band-Aid and postpone this for the next future generation.
I feel that that's very beautifully put, that we can do more. Then yes, we shall do more. However, at the moment right now, what we can do is bring in these refugees. What we can do is take in people like Alan, who instead of dying on some shore, could come and live peacefully in Canada. Should they want to go back to their country afterwards, let it be so. But off right now, what we can do, as you said, we should do more. Let's do more. Let's take in refugees and do more.
First of all, for the government to use the death of a child to promote their argument is honestly irresponsible, and it is a sensationalization of the issue here. What we're here to debate is whether or not there is an obligation. Canada has already and has been taking in refugees. We've also been sending aid. The opposition is arguing for a more nuanced, a more comprehensive, and a more holistic approach to the issue, rather than just a blanket edict that says, we'll take in refugees, we won't consider any other options.
Could the opposition be please reminded that the topic today on the table is be it resolved that Canada has an obligation?
Canada does not have an obligation, firstly, because it is a voluntary act. Secondly,
I was stating the topic of the day.
Of the policy. And third, the alternatives which opposition has brought forward for you tonight.
We are not using.
We're not here to look for what is the best alternative. We are here to debate the topic of the day. Therefore, as much as good as your alternatives are, we can discuss them to the side, but they should not be brought to this table today. They're not the topic of debate of the day.
The reason that this is a topic of the debate is because the government is simply and only willing to consider taking in refugees.
Leader of the opposition.
We concede that. We understand that refugees are being taken in and should be taken in, but we're also willing to consider other options. We're looking at other alternatives. We're looking at the matter realistically and holistically. The government is simply just taking in refugees, and this honestly and quite frankly is a Band-Aid solution.
And we're talking about being obliged to take them in, not just taking them in.
We are allowing this exciting rapid-fire round to go into double overtime because it's great. I'm going to allow the government to a brief response, and then we'll call the rapid-fire round to an end and get on with the closing statements. Prime Minister, 30 seconds, please.
Your use of a Band-Aid effect has been shown that when we go overseas and we intervene in a problem that is not ours, the situation gets messy. We can go in to help. Blue helmets are on the ground supporting these people, but that is not all Canada can do. A Band-Aid effect would be going there and saying we're just going to provide towels, warm clothes, and that's it. That is all not we can do, and we will do more.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Ladies and gentlemen of the audience, judges, we now come to the 3-minute closing statements led by the Leader of the Opposition, Kimberly O'War. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The opposition would first of all like to thank the government for a lively and at times dramatic effort. We recognize the good intentions that the government has. However, we disagree with the execution that they're willing to take. 3 points that the government brought up that I'd like to rehash. The first of all is that we have a legal obligation. As side opposition has successfully countered, this legal obligation does not circumvent a country's sovereignty. And further from that, the existence of a refugee crisis at the moment and any obligation that the government tries to argue implies a previous failure to intervene when the crisis was boiling. The second point that the government made is that there's a moral obligation. And here the government tried to play moral math with us in where they tried to say that if we address this one situation, then that absolves us from our previous failure. This is simply incorrect, and because of that, side opposition does not see any moral obligation here. And further, the last point that side government argued is that because there's an economic benefit, then there is an obligation to take in refugees. This constant cost-benefit analysis is not something that the opposition is in the business of doing. We recognize that Canadians currently take in refugees out of the goodness of their hearts. It is a humanitarian effort, and the reason that the current program works is because it's voluntary. People are coming here because they're wanted, because the capability and the infrastructure is there for them. And that's why Canadians have a humanitarian reputation around the world. Finally, I'd like to conclude with the points that side opposition presented. Our first point, again, was that the current refugee system works. We have a 94% acceptance rate of Syrian refugees at the moment. Of the 277 applications I mentioned previously, 261 were accepted. Of those that were not, 5 of them were either withdrawn or abandoned. I think the Canadian people are doing pretty well, and we don't need the Canadian government to tell us what to do. Second of all, the feasibility of such an open-ended commitment. While it might sound grand to say we'll take in all the refugees, we need to look at how this will actually be done and to make sure that we have the infrastructure in place and the willing people, the human-to-human connection that refugees need to successfully integrate into the community. Finally, side opposition spoke about alternatives. We can see that, yes, we do need to take in refugees, but we also need to consider more. We need to consider a permanent and effective solution to the problem so that we're not just transporting the symptoms, but we're addressing the problem at the root. And frankly, for the government to create an obligation, it's an insult to the daily efforts and the daily sacrifices of Canadian families and Canadian private sponsors who day by day undertake the sacrifice to bring in Canadian refugees into their homes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Madam Leader of the Opposition. And with her closing statement, the Right Honourable Lena Gomez, Prime Minister.
Thank you. We cannot disagree with you more. We feel that the people, the private citizens that are taking on these refugees, wherever they may come from, are doing it because they do feel morally obliged, because that is the culture that we have created here in Canada. And when we mean Canada, we're not talking about the government, we're also talking about the people, like we said in our definition earlier on. So thank you, side opposition, for bringing up arguments against our resolution. For example, reminding us that, yes, we've committed lessons, but this is not on our moral budget to renew. This is solely for us to take as a learning experience and to not let those falls happen again. We are a learning nation. I believe that we're all capable of doing better than what we've done in the past and what our ancestors have done. We also recognize that we can do more, and we do agree with you, and we should send out aid, but that's not where we draw our line and where we should ever draw our line. To serve, thank you again for helping us prove that our arguments are stronger and somewhat more comprehensive. Specifically, that we do have legal obligations, not only through IRPA, but through the United Nations Human Declaration of Rights. And not only through moral, in the sense of what our ancestors have done and what we should begin to do with our land and learn from them, but to also respond and reflect what the Canadian nation believes we should do. We also thank you for taking the time to listen to us debunking the myths about the economic changes that refugees cause. Because right now, there are 19.5 million estimated refugees in the world. Only 14.4 are actually under the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. We understand that when numbers get that big, the severity of them becomes incomprehensible. We really can't wrap around our heads. 19.5 million people are displaced. They don't have somewhere to call a home, and they can't look their kids and their family members in the eyes. Now I'd like to present you all with a question. Are you a first, second, or third generation Canadian? Now, regardless of what you identify with, what contributions have you made to Canada? What contributions have your parents made? The government sees it important to acknowledge that diversity is never something to be feared or misrepresented. Canada's diversity is our strength, and our strength, properly nourished, is the greatest thing we have as a nation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Thank you, Prime Minister. I'm now going to turn the floor over to our honorable judges to ask questions of the debaters. Thank you. Who would like to go? Perhaps I could ask a question of the judges, especially Councillor DeHart. Does this level of debate supersede that which you hear on most Monday nights, Councillor? Not to put you on the spot.
In one word, absolutely.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I'll direct this to the Deputy Prime Minister. Some people have written that the obligation to look after our own disadvantaged citizens exists before extending charity, if you will, to refugees. And I would be interested in your views on how to balance those two obligations.
Thank you very much. I feel that Canada has the capacity, as it stands, to take in refugees. That even though there is that dichotomy of whether helping ourselves or whether helping others comes into play, there are still areas with which we can help others while not hindering the help to ourselves. For example, in New Brunswick here, where there were job opportunities which Canadians themselves did not take in. That shows a small niche, a small crack in the system where we need people to fill in that space, and we do not have that. And that is where we can bring in refugees. In addition to that, with Canada's aging population, we need youth for certain jobs. Now, to try and stimulate this, as we can try and stimulate the birth rate, however, this has not been successful so far. So, whilst our birth rate is catching up, we can take in refugees to try and fill that gap and assist the population at the time. There's going to be a huge burden placed on our social services, which we shall need to find a way to account for, as the elderly population continue requiring more services and more medical services, for example. However, refugees can help in to try and stimulate the economic growth and support the economy in that sense. And in that way, we can balance between assisting ourselves, so the people who we're with, and assisting refugees, so people who need our help.
My question is for the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. And I think you talked about, that's you, correct? You talked about sending aid to countries rather than bringing refugees here to safety to help them rebuild their home. And do you think that sort of position would be feasible, for example, with the current situation in Syria where the people are in crisis and half the population, or a huge percentage of the population, has had to leave? And do you think that position would work with the current crisis?
Okay, I would like to apologize because I believe I did not state clearly. When we say to send in aid, it's not instead of helping refugees. We can help refugees. Opposition is not against that. We just say that we are not obliged to, and the most efficient way to end this crisis is to send aid. Specifically in this situation, send aid to Turkey, first of all, because it's a NATO member and it's bearing the forefront of the burden of the refugee crisis. And Turkey clearly is not holding up, let alone Germany. So we believe that sending aid there, because opposition believes that instead of making them come here, why not make where they are? Because the refugees traveled and suffered to get to where they are. Why not send material and things to help them live comfortably there instead of forcing them to come here to get a better life? Opposition believes that if we really want to help them, should we not help them there? Why make them come here to get the help? I hope that answers.
Are there any further questions? Yes, Maxine?
Jamie, I just wanted to also say that we're not near as polite and nice in City Council when we're debating. I do have a question. I hope I can articulate this as well as the panel here. Now, Sarah, I guess I can call them by their names. It was easier. It was easier than. Thank you, everybody. First time, you commented on a statement that Lisa made, the PMO, that the refugees eventually want to go home and perhaps send aid to home, and the PMO said that that wasn't completely true, that they will have no home. Can you just expand on that?
Right now, the government is banking on the fact that Syria will not get better, so they make the bold claim that they will not have a home. Syria is still there. There are still people living there, and refugees still Syrian refugees, forgive me, Syrian refugees still identify it as their home. I believe as long as that is there, where there are still people there, you still identify as a Syrian, that is home. And as long as they can still do that, Canada can help that, and it won't be futile.
Thank you. Sharon?
Thank you. My question would be to the opposition. I think that we are all very familiar with the reality that politicians are often running to keep up with the people they're supposed to be leading. And I wonder if you have some observations about the role of the private citizen in this issue.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So just with regards to the Syrian refugees, since it is the most relevant refugee crisis at the moment, what we found in just 2014 alone is that twice the number of refugees who were brought here by government assistance were actually brought here by private sponsors. And there have been studies done that show that when there's a human connection, integration is infinitely more successful bringing in refugees into the country. So that's why we believe that the current refugee system does work, because there's a human-to-human connection, and people with the resources and the capabilities and people who are on the ground are the ones who are in charge and operating this refugee program. Thank you. No problem.
Thank you very much. That now concludes the judges' question period. I'm going to ask the judges to exit into the green room to sequester for about 10 minutes for your discussion. And we'll see you then. And I'm going to invite the debaters to come over and have a seat, and invite Phil back to the stage to introduce Wally Lightbody. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you in a few minutes. Yeah.
It gets better every year. I'd like to invite Wally Lightbody to join us here. We are here tonight, as I indicated at the walk-in. We're here to honor one of the best. For those of you who have a little gray hair, as I have none, you may very well have remembered or heard the name Roger Watts. He was a storied lawyer in this community. For those of you that have moved here recently, you would not be familiar. And so I'm going to ask Wally Lightbody to tell you a little bit about his life. But for 25 years, as I indicated, he was at Salome Watts. And he was someone who was feared. And I know that Wally will expound on this, but he was feared. If you heard that the client on the other side of the room had retained Roger, you knew that you were in a fight. And that is why his death to a pulmonary embolism was so terribly, terribly tragic, because he was just one of those superstars that gave honor and respect to the word lawyer. Another gentleman who's the word honor and respect attached to the word lawyer. Would you please welcome Queen's Counsel, retired, but he still does a little bit of work here and there, Wally Lightbody. Wally, good evening.
Well, I don't know about you folks, but I was sure impressed with the level of that debate. As Phil says, it gets better every year. And I tell you, those four debaters that were up here, I don't know where the future holds for them, what career they want to go into. Might be politics, might be law, might be one of many different things, but I'm sure they'll all be very successful. So it was a delight. But you know, I wanted to, before I say a few words about Roger, I just wanted to say a couple of words about UBC Okanagan. And this we're celebrating the 10-year anniversary of UBC Okanagan. And when saying that, I want to just mention that a number of years ago, when I first moved to Kelowna, we examined the curriculum at UBC and noticed that there was very little legal significance being offered, so that with the assistance of Professor Carl Hodge and Deputy Vice Chancellor Doug Aram, we instituted a course of legal studies and political science department. Honored guests have included Chief Justice Beverly McLaughlin and Mr. Justice Frank Iacobucci. Kathy Heinrichs, Kelowna lawyer, has done a marvelous job in coordinating the course and arranging for the Kelowna lawyers to volunteer their time in delivering the lectures in what is described as Canadian contemporary law. Needless to say, the course has been wildly successful. With the assistance of the Kelowna, Vernon, and other Okanagan lawyers, we raised $50,000 and obtained a matching grant from the Law Foundation to fund one or more scholarships for a student graduating from UBC Okanagan who has been accepted into the Faculty of Law at the Vancouver campus. These awards are in the range of $4,000 for each and go a long way to helping defray the heavy post-secondary costs. I might say, as time goes on, I would like to see a satellite law school here at UBC Okanagan. In this world of advanced technology, thank you. I know you're with me on that. In this world of advanced technology, this should be a priority for our university, and I intend to work toward that goal. The debate, I might say, is fashioned on one that I spearheaded in the UBC Law School to honor a dear friend. It's now known as the Guile Debate. It's into its 20th year. And when we started this, I was so pleased to get so many great volunteers to come forward to assist us in this. But back to Roger. When our friend Roger left us, I thought a tribute to him, and in keeping with my vision of the legal presence, we could put on a similar event and then make a suggestion to a number of people. I had no idea it would erupt, as I say, with such a voice of enthusiasm. Now, a few words about Roger. He was born in Nairn, northern Scotland in 1945. His father had been posted during the war, educated in various private schools in Rhodesia and South Africa, high school in Chilliwack, undergrad work, and law school at UBC. His legal career was in Vancouver, Vernon, and Kelowna. We recognize him with this debate because he was indeed a tenacious and passionate advocate. In a eulogy I wrote for The Advocate, the lawyer's publication, I described him as a man for all seasons in the classic Shakespearean sense. Finally, I would like to thank our sponsors and contributors who have made this event possible, and a special thank you to our committee members. Please hold your applause until I've mentioned all of their names. MC Phil Johnson, which does such a wonderful job. Moderator Jamie Ma. Committee members Sandra Watts, UBC Okanagan Professor Carl Hodge, Alumni Rep Adrian Skinner, These are the Roger Watts Advocacy Debates, and they are with us here today. Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming.
There's one more voice that I would like to welcome to the podium. He is the Dean of Creative and Critical Studies, Professor of Critical Studies at UBCO. He has a BA from the University of Ghana. He graduated with distinction from the University of Ghana, obtained an MA at the University of British Columbia, and a PhD at Queen's University. I don't know if he was a part of the debating team of any of those august institutions, but nevertheless, sir, it is a pleasure to welcome you here, and would you please welcome to the podium Dr. Wisdom Tetley from UBC. Oh.
Thanks, Phil. Just want to correct my affiliation. I'm no longer with the Faculty of Creative and Critical Studies. I used to be dean of that faculty, but I'm now dean of the Irving K. Barber School of Arts and Sciences. And it's in that capacity that I stand before you this evening to express my gratitude to all of you as members of our community for supporting this event. Your presence here, I think, is eloquent testimony to the fact that the issues that you saw these bright minds talk about this evening resonate with our community. That is something that touches all of us in different ways, and that is something that as Canadians we're contending with in concert with our colleagues around the world. And I'm glad to see all of you engage with this issue in the context of this evening's debate. I also want to use this opportunity to reemphasize something that we like to talk about, which is that the university may be physically located somewhere, but in fact is very much a part of this community. And we make every effort we can to make sure that we do come into the community and engage with the community on a number of issues and at multiple levels. And so I just want to thank all of you once again for coming here. I want to express my profound appreciation to our students. They, in fact, illuminate what it means to be a place of mind. And I think you all agree with me that they've eloquently and very passionately engaged with the issue of the evening, and that they've left all of us with some food for thought. And that as we leave here this evening, we become voices that engage with this issue in the various places that we engage with. So thank you very much, and thanks again, and congratulations to our debaters. Thank you.
Our judges are still deliberating. They won't be much longer. A passing observation, though, and I can say these things now without prejudicing the judge's decision or the debate, but I am struck by how it is pictures of children that caused the world to wake up. And I think that I will refer to those of you who are familiar with the Vietnamese War. And there was that picture of that little girl running down a road, burned by napalm. And it was her picture that flashed around the world in black and white that caused the world to wake up to what was happening. There's another quite famous picture of a girl with green eyes. And the picture appeared on the cover of the National Geographic. And that picture went on to make people understand what was going on in Pakistan and Bangladesh. And you'll pardon my emotion, because I've interviewed a number of people whose lives would have been involved with Alan Kurdi. But I will bet you that if we hadn't seen that picture of that Turkish soldier bending over and picking up the body of Alan Kurdi, that we would not be having this conversation tonight. I don't believe that we would have brought 25,000 Syrians and Iranians to this country. I don't believe the world would have reached out. And so it is pictures of children that have changed how we view our world. And one other observation. I don't know if you saw the video, but it flashed around the world. It was taken with a drone, and it was the city of Homs in Syria. A city of 8 million people. Unbelievable to think that this was home to 8 million people. And as this drone flew over the streets and over the incredibly devastated and bombed out buildings, it saw 3 little boys running in an alley. It saw 2 dogs fighting in an alley. And it saw 1 white car. And that was all that was left in this gigantic field of rubble. We ready?
We have a result.
then I will stop the travelogue. But I was suddenly struck as I saw this video. These people, these millions and millions of people, they have no home to go home to. This is now home. And we are quite blessed that they are here. Sir, I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Phil. I'm going to, the judges have made their decision. They are in agreement. I'm going to invite the debaters back up onto the stage, please. The judges are going to come back out, and head judge, whom I'll invite up here, Jane, is going to offer a few remarks.
All right, thank you.
It's a big step.
I'm not announcing the winner or anything like that. I'm just giving my remarks. Well, thank you very much. That was just a fabulous experience for us. It really was, especially for me. I don't normally get to deal with such lovely people like you four who are intelligent and hardworking and well prepared and not committing crimes. It's just it was great. Obviously the caliber of the debates is very, very high, and we just thoroughly enjoyed that. We liked the way you combined your passion with politeness, and we all know who can learn some lessons from that. We should just send this videotape down south, really. We thought, your comments were thought-provoking. You actually changed some of the judges' minds on some issues. That was very amazing. It was interesting, it was fascinating, and we just had a great time. Thank you very much. Good luck. Thank you.
Going to invite Wally Lightbody and Sandra Watts to give out the prizes. Jane, I think it would be appropriate if you were to announce the winners on behalf of your esteemed panel of judges. If you don't mind coming back up and making that announcement.
I'm getting tired of that stuff.
Could you just pass me that paper? And that one too. So I have to come back. Thank you very much. Well, it was a hard task to pick a winner, but we've decided that the winners of the debate are the opposition, Kimberly Ower and Sarah Nunes.
Congratulations to all of our student debaters. The checks will be delivered to you by the university, so you can't go out in the town tonight. Well, you can, but can't spend it all in one place this evening. Those will be given to you over the next several days, I understand. Congratulations. We also have prizes for the 2 alternate debaters, if they could come up on the stage, please. Ladies and gentlemen, I said earlier that being an understudy is in some ways a little tougher. No time in the limelight, but you have to study your role, and you kind of get double nerves not knowing if you're going to go ahead. I'm going to ask Michael Ferguson from the West Coast Grill and Oyster Bar to buy these two charming young people dinner. I understand you have some gift certificates. Thank you, Michael. Now, you can spend that tonight. Take your fellows out for an oyster or two. I'd like to thank our rousing piper, Chad Goodman of the magnificent Kelowna Pipe Band, and our photographer, Sean Goodman. And I'd like to thank our student debaters, our master of ceremonies, our esteemed judges, most of all, and our sponsors, of course, but most of all, you, ladies and gentlemen, whether you come here, friends or family. Thank you for turning out tonight to support these brilliant young people. I'm happy to tell you that I whipped up 3 dozen Swedish meatballs, actually more than that, which are awaiting you at the top of the stairs. There's a no-host bar. I hope you'll stick around and enjoy my cooking. Cheers. Thanks for coming.